The sign at the entrance of Oak Ridge Ranch was carved from solid white oak 70 years ago by Arthur Vance's father. Rain had blurred the letters and sun had bleached the wood, but the foundation remained sunk 6 feet into the earth. At 71, Arthur Vance moved with the slow, deliberate certainty of a man who knew every stone, root, and rattlesnake on his 10,000 acres. His hands were leathered, his spine slightly curved from a lifetime in the saddle, but his eyes were bright, clear, and defiant. Arthur was the last of his kind in Valley County. One by one, the neighboring ranches had fallen. Corporate conglomerates, real estate moguls, and resort developers had swept through the valley like a slow-moving flood, swallowing up generations of heritage and replacing them with golf courses, luxury lodges, and high-walled estates. Arthur's cattle still grazed on the native bluestem grass, but he was surrounded by steel and glass. Yet, behind Arthur's weathered exterior, lay a quiet, aching vulnerability: his late wife, Clara, and the memory of their only son, Thomas. Thomas had died 25 years ago in a winter blizzard while trying to pull a stranded calf from a frozen creek. Clara had passed away 3 years prior, her hand resting in Arthur's on the wraparound porch as the sun set over the ridge. For Arthur, Oak Ridge was not merely real estate, it was the repository of their voices, their sweat, and Thomas's buried memory. His emotional weakness was a profound, suffocating grief that he mistook for duty. He believed that if he lost even an inch of this land, he would be betraying the dead, erasing the only evidence that his family had ever lived and loved there. That conviction was put to the test on a scorched afternoon in late July when a sleek black helicopter descended onto the dry dirt road outside the main gate, kicking up a cyclone of dust that coated Arthur's faded red pickup. Out stepped Sterling Croft. Croft was 42, impeccably tailored in a custom charcoal suit that defied the summer heat and radiated the absolute, careless arrogance of a man worth $40 billion. Croft was the founder and CEO of Vance Tech Developments, a mega corporation specializing in high-end ultra-exclusive retreats for the world's elite. Croft did not see land as soil, ecosystem, or heritage. He saw it as an empty canvas waiting for his financial signature. He wanted Oak Ridge. He needed Oak Ridge. It was the crucial centerpiece for his crown jewel, the Horizon, a 30,000-acre private sanctuary for international billionaires. Croft walked toward the porch where Arthur sat cleaning an old saddle. Croft's attorney walked a step behind him carrying a leather briefcase. "Mr. Vance," Croft said, his voice smooth, practiced, and dripping with corporate charm. "I won't waste your time. I've bought everything around you. Yours is the final piece." Arthur did not look up from his work. "It's not for sale, Mr. Croft." Croft chuckled softly, gesturing to his attorney, who pulled out a document. "Every man has a number, Arthur. I'm offering you $40 million. Cash. You can buy a palace in Fiji, a mansion in Florida, whatever you want. You're working yourself to the bone on a dying ranch. Take the exit." Arthur stopped his rag and looked Sterling Croft dead in the eye. "My son's spirit is in that creek bed, Croft. My wife's heart is under that porch. You can't put $40 million in a coffin, and you can't buy what isn't yours to take." Croft's polite smile vanished, replaced by a cold, sharp sneer. He stepped closer, leaning over the porch railing. "You think you're being noble. Old man, you're being foolish. Nostalgia is a luxury for poor people. You're standing in the way of progress. I will buy this land, whether you sell it to me today or whether I take it from your estate when your heart finally gives out." "Get off my dirt," Arthur said softly. Croft turned on his heel, stepping back toward the helicopter. 3 years, Vance. Look around you. In 3 years, I will own every horizon you see. The war did not begin with guns. It began with paper, machinery, and pressure. Sterling Croft was not used to hearing the word no, and he deployed his vast resources to bleed Arthur Vance dry. Over the next 2 years, Oak Ridge became an island under siege. Croft bought the water rights upstream, diverting the natural runoff into artificial lakes for his newly constructed luxury golf course. Arthur watched his ponds dry into cracked mud. He was forced to dig deeper wells at astronomical costs, draining his modest savings. Then came the legal battles. Croft's legal team bombarded Arthur with zoning lawsuits, environmental compliance audits, and property line disputes. Week after week, process servers arrived at the gate. Arthur had to hire lawyers, spending tens of thousands of dollars just to defend what was already his. Croft's construction crews built massive 10-foot concrete perimeter walls along the borders of Arthur's property, deliberately blocking the traditional migration routes of Arthur's cattle and shutting off historical access roads. High-powered construction lights blared all night long, disrupting the peace that Arthur had preserved for decades. The psychological toll was devastating. Arthur was sleeping barely 3 hours a night. The grief he carried blossomed into isolation and despair. Sitting alone in the silent house, looking at photographs of Clara and Thomas, the weakness in his heart whispered that Croft was right. He was old, tired, and defeated. Why fight a billionaire with endless wealth when all it brought was exhaustion? During the winter of the second year, a severe freeze struck the valley. The diverted water channels caused unexpected flooding across Arthur's lower pastures, which then froze into solid sheets of ice. 30 head of cattle died in a single night. Arthur stood in the freezing rain, trying to haul a dead calf from the mud, his hands bleeding, his chest heaving with dry sobs. He collapsed against the fence post, crushed by the realization that he was losing the land bit by bit anyway. His inability to let go of the past was destroying his present. Croft's agent visited the next morning, dropping a revised offer on the kitchen table. $20 million, half the original offer. He's squeezing you, Arthur, the agent said plainly. Next year it'll be 10, then 5. Take it while you can still walk. Arthur looked at the paper. His hands trembled. He was broken. He picked up a pen, his knuckles white, his heart pounding in his chest. He touched the tip of the pen to the signature line. The grief whispered to him to give up, to let the water wash away the memories. He closed his eyes. In the deep stillness of his mind, he didn't hear the roar of Croft's bulldozers or the legal threats. He remembered Clara's voice telling him that a home isn't built of wood and dirt, but of the promises you keep when it's hard. He remembered Thomas's fierce, stubborn pride. Selling meant letting Croft turn Thomas's resting place into a country club parking lot. Arthur dropped the pen. He tore the contract in half, tossed it at the agent's feet, and walked out to the barn. He would die on this land before he signed it away. While Croft focused all his cruelty on crushing Arthur, he neglected the very ground he was building his empire upon. The summer of the third year brought an unprecedented drought to the valley, followed by torrential late autumn rains. Croft's massive development project, the Horizon, was nearly complete. Millions of tons of concrete, marble mansions, artificial lakes, and underground parking structures had been constructed at breakneck speed. To meet his aggressive deadlines and spite Arthur, Croft had bypassed several detailed geological surveys, bribing local officials to expedite permits. Arthur, however, knew the valley's subterranean secrets. His grandfather had drawn hand-mapped charts of the underground limestone caverns and deep subterranean aquifers that ran beneath Valley County. Arthur knew that the area known as Blackwood Ridge, where Croft had built his central $500 million resort hotel and subterranean vault facilities, sat directly atop a complex karst system. For decades, the root systems of the old-growth timber and the natural flow of the local creeks had kept the subterranean soil stable. But Croft had clear-cut the old timber and diverted the creeks into heavy, concrete-lined channels. When the rains came in October of the third year, the water had nowhere to go. Unable to drain naturally through the surface soil, millions of gallons of water forced their way down into the deep limestone fissures beneath Croft's mega-resort. The heavily altered water table began to dissolve the soft underground rock at an alarming rate. Arthur noticed the signs first. On his daily rides along the perimeter, he saw deep fissures opening in the soil along Croft's border walls. He saw old oak trees suddenly tilting at strange angles. He heard the deep, muffled groans of the earth shifting hundreds of feet below. Arthur recognized what was happening. The massive weight of Croft's concrete monstrosities was collapsing the ancient underground cavern system. Croft was unaware. He had invited international investors, celebrity buyers, and media moguls for the grand pre-opening gala of the Horizon. Over $2 billion of corporate capital and personal fortune were tied up in the project, which was scheduled to open in less than a month. It happened on a cold Tuesday night. Arthur was sitting on his porch when he felt the tremor. It wasn't an earthquake. It was a localized, violent subsidence. A dull thunder echoed across the valley, shaking the windows of Arthur's homestead. 2 miles away, at Croft's flagship development site, the earth gave way. A massive sinkhole 300 feet wide and over 100 feet deep opened directly beneath the central infrastructure hub of the horizon. The heavy concrete water diversions ruptured instantly, shooting high-pressure water through the underground fissures and destabilizing the surrounding soil. Within hours, the luxury hotel's foundation began to crack and settle into the cavern. Worst of all, the main pipeline supplying water and power to the entire 30,000-acre complex was destroyed, and the structural collapse threatened to pull down the neighboring private estates like a row of dominoes. By morning, Croft's multi-billion-dollar dream was a catastrophe. Engineers from across the country rushed to the scene. Their prognosis was absolute and devastating. The entire resort was built on a collapsing karst network. The only way to save the development, prevent the sinkhole from swallowing the remaining structures, and stabilize the water pressure was to install a massive surface drainage and relief bypass system immediately. There was only one problem. The natural geological discharge point, the only low-lying, stable bedrock basin capable of absorbing the millions of gallons of trapped water and providing solid ground for heavy stabilization equipment, lay directly in the heart of Oak Ridge Ranch. Without access to Arthur Vance's land to dig relief channels and anchor the heavy structural shoring rigs, the entire $5 billion development would continue to collapse into the earth. Insurance would not cover the damages due to the fraudulent geological permits Croft had used. Croft Tech was facing total catastrophic bankruptcy. 3 years to the day after his first visit, a vehicle arrived at the gate of Oak Ridge Ranch. There was no helicopter this time, no legal team, no armed security detail, just a single mud-splattered SUV that crawled slowly up the driveway and came to a stop in front of the old house. Sterling Croft stepped out of the vehicle. The charcoal suit was gone. He wore a wrinkled button-down shirt, his tie loosened, his hair disheveled. The arrogance that had defined his posture for 3 years was entirely gone, replaced by the hollow, terrified look of a man staring into an abyss. He looked 10 years older. His hands, usually so still and commanding, trembled slightly as he walked up the wooden steps of the porch. Arthur sat in the same chair, holding the same rag, working on a bridle. He didn't look up immediately. He let the silence stretch, filled only with the creaking of the porch planks and the distant call of a hawk. "Arthur," Croft said. His voice was hoarse, stripped of its polished cadence. Arthur slowly set the bridle down. "Mr. Croft, you're trespassing." Croft swallowed hard, stepping closer. He didn't look at Arthur's eyes. He looked at the wooden floorboards. "I need your help, Arthur. I need access to your lower pasture. My engineers need to cut an emergency drainage channel through your south ridge and set up stabilization rigs on your bedrock. If we don't start drilling by tomorrow morning, the main structure drops into the sinkhole. My company, my entire life, collapses." Arthur leaned back in his chair, folding his hands over his belt buckle. "I recall you telling me 3 years ago that nostalgia was a luxury for poor people. You told me you'd own every horizon I could see." Croft winced as if struck. "I was wrong. I was arrogant. I didn't understand. I didn't respect what this land was." "You still don't," Arthur said calmly. "You don't care about the land now. You care about your money." Croft took a shaking breath and reached into his coat pocket. He pulled out a folded document and laid it on the small wooden table beside Arthur. "I'll pay you whatever you want," Croft whispered, his voice cracking. 50 million. 100 million. I'll give you a percentage of the entire development's revenue. Just sign an easement agreement. Give us permission to work on your dirt for 90 days. That's all I'm asking. Please." Arthur looked at the paper, then looked at Croft. For 3 years, Arthur had fought this man with fury, grief, and desperation. He had hated Croft. He had blamed Croft for making his final years a living hell. But looking at the billionaire now, broken, desperate, reduced to a weeping beggar on the porch of a house he had tried to destroy, Arthur felt something unexpected. He didn't feel triumph. He felt a deep, cleansing calm. Arthur realized that his grief was no longer a weakness Croft could exploit. By holding on to this land, Arthur hadn't been clinging to the dead. He had been protecting the living memory of love, honor, and endurance. The land didn't belong to Croft, and it didn't really belong to Arthur either. Arthur was just its steward, and a steward does not let the land be destroyed by greed, nor does he use it to crush another human being out of vengeance. The power had shifted entirely, but Arthur had no desire to play the tyrant. "I won't take your $100 million, Croft," Arthur said softly. Croft's face went pale. "Arthur, please, it's over for me if you say no. I'm begging you. I am begging you on my knees." Croft's legs actually gave way slightly, his fingers clutching the porch railing to keep from falling. "Stand up, man," Arthur snapped, his voice firm and commanding. "Stand up on your own feet." Croft straightened, his eyes wide with desperate tears. "I won't sell you an easement," Arthur continued, picking up the paper and tossing it into the small trash can beside his chair. "And I won't take your money. But I won't let the whole valley turn into a mudslide because of your stupidity either." Croft blinked, stunned. "What? My terms are non-negotiable," Arthur said, standing up to his full height. His shoulders were straight, his voice echoing with an absolute authority that no billionaire's checkbook could ever buy. "First," Arthur said, pointing a calloused finger at Croft's chest, "you will tear down that concrete perimeter wall along my south line. Every inch of it. You will restore the natural migration path for the cattle and the wildlife." "Done," Croft said instantly. "Consider it gone." "Second," Arthur continued, "you will deed the permanent water rights of the Upper Creek back to the county, with an irrevocable environmental easement ensuring no commercial development can ever divert it again." "Yes, done." "Third," Arthur said, stepping closer until he was looking down into Croft's pale face, "you will pay for the restoration of every acre of my pasture that your construction damaged over the last 3 years. And you will personally write a public apology to the people of Valley County for forcing fraudulent permits through our land board." Croft stared at Arthur, overwhelmed by the terms. They were terms that cost him his pride, his absolute control, and millions in remediation, but they saved his company from absolute extinction. "And the land?" Croft asked, his voice barely a whisper. "The easement fee? You will pay my legal fees from the last 3 years," Arthur said. "Not a penny more. My land stays mine. You get your drainage channel, you stabilize your project, and then you get your machinery off my property and you never set foot on Oak Ridge Ranch again." Croft stood frozen for a long moment. He looked at the old cowboy, a man he had tried to starve out, sue into oblivion, and break through sheer financial power. He realized that Arthur Vance was a man who could not be bought because he possessed something Sterling Croft had never been able to purchase. A complete and unshakable soul. Croft reached out a trembling hand. "You have a deal, Mr. Vance." Arthur looked at Croft's hand, then looked up at the ridge where the sun was beginning to drop, casting a golden light across the high blue-stem grass. He didn't shake Croft's hand. "Get your engineers," Arthur said, turning back toward his house. "Work starts at dawn. Don't be late." 6 months later, the valley had settled into a quiet rhythm. The heavy equipment had come and gone. The sinkhole had been stabilized, the emergency channels had drained the trapped waters, and Croft's development was forced to scale down dramatically, converting half of its planned commercial area into a protected green space to comply with the new environmental realities. Croft himself had left the daily operations of Vance Tech, spent and humbled by the near disaster. The concrete walls that had once enclosed Oak Ridge Ranch were gone. The native grass was growing back over the old construction ruts, turned emerald green by the free-flowing waters of the restored creek. On a warm evening in late May, Arthur Vance walked out to the edge of the south pasture. His horse walked slowly beside him, its reins trailing in the grass. Arthur stopped at the edge of the creek where the water bubbled cleanly over smooth stones. He sat down on a large, flat rock, taking off his hat and letting the cool mountain breeze run through his thin white hair. For 3 years, he had carried the weight of the past like a heavy stone in his chest, terrified that losing the land meant losing Conclair and Thomas. But as he looked out across the open, wall-less valley, feeling the deep stability of the earth beneath him, the heavy weight finally melted away. He realized his win wasn't just that he had beaten a billionaire. His win was that he had conquered his own fear. He hadn't kept the ranch out of bitter grief. He had kept it because it was his home. A place of life, renewal, and quiet strength. Arthur closed his eyes and inhaled the sweet smell of damp soil and blooming clover. In the murmur of the running water and the rustle of the oak leaves above, he didn't hear ghost voices of grief anymore. He just heard peace. The last cowboy smiled, put his hat back on, and looked out over a horizon that belonged to no one, and yet belonged to him completely.